Visit Sailrite.com for all your project supplies, tools, and instructions. In this video, we're going to show you the general process of reupholstering a sofa. We'll specifically be highlighting our tools, materials, tips, and techniques that we use throughout the process to accomplish this task. This is a quick overview of the upholstery process for a sofa, not a full how-to video. In this first chapter, we'll be examining our sofa to determine what we're going to change. We think the design of this armrest is not the greatest, so we're going to end up changing this and making this more of a square look. We're also going to be removing the piping that goes around the armrest and making it all one piece. To accomplish this look, we're actually going to redesign the entire sofa, starting with the arms and then the backrests. We're going to be using this upholstery work table. We have a video on how to make this upholstery work table. It makes the job a lot easier, and you can find that in the description below. In this chapter, we'll be removing the old fabric. We'll remove our cambric dust cover and all the staples around the perimeter to release that bottom edge. I highly recommend this staple lift from Sailrite. It's probably the best one I've ever used, and you can actually remove the staples just by twisting the handle all the way around. Now we're going to use our tack and staple remover to remove the tack strips located on each side of the back of the sofa. The tack and staple remover is also a very useful tool when removing these upholstery tack strips. We'll continue to remove each piece of the sofa one at a time. Sofas often have to be removed in a specific order as pieces are stapled on top of one another. In this next chapter, we'll be sewing our new decking. Now we'll measure our old decking piece. This is one of the few pieces that we're going to actually replicate on our new sofa. We're going to use a tough upholstery decking fabric to create our decking and also create a barrier between our frame and our sofa cushions and foam. For our sofa, we're going to be using an upholstery fabric called Nook. It is a beautiful indoor faux leather from Sailrite. Sailrite also offers many other fabric brands that would be fantastic choices for this application. The clear acrylic ruler is one of the most important tools for any type of upholstery project, and we'll be using it throughout our upholstery of this sofa. Here we're using it to cut the strip that goes down the middle of our decking. Here we're cutting out a strip vinyl that runs down the center of our decking. We will also be using basting tape throughout this video to create our hems and baste our panels together. It's a great tool to keep your hems and panels basted together when sewing. We placed basting tape on top of those half-inch hems, and now we're going to baste it down in the center of our decking. We rolled up the outside of our decking so that we could fit it under the arm of the sewing machine, and we'll sew a straight stitch down those hems on the center piece of the decking. For the front strip of our decking, we're going to need to measure our material to determine the size of our cutouts on our new front panel. These cutouts will form the two outside corners of our decking. Now that our corners are cut out, we're going to apply basting tape down one of the sides and then baste outside surfaces facing one another. Then we'll take it over to the sewing machine and sew with a half-inch seam allowance to finish this corner. Now we'll baste that front panel with outside surfaces facing each other down across our decking material, making sure that we don't stretch the material. Now we'll sew a half-inch seam allowance down this panel, doing some reversing at the beginning and the end. In this chapter, we'll be adding our new batting. The old upholsterer already struck a line across this bottom edge of our sofa, so we're going to use that line when we staple down our batting. The Sailrite long nose and short nose staple guns are specifically designed for the perfect penetration for upholstery work, meaning it won't drive the staples so deep as to damage the wood or fabric like other staple guns. This stapler also shoots half-inch crown staples as opposed to the standard 3/8 inch, making it ideal for delicate faux leather or vinyl fabrics. In this last few clips, we've been using it to staple the batting to the front and back of the sofa. Batting is a great way to get a nice and smooth finish before putting our fabric in place. In this chapter, we'll be sewing our decking to the sofa. Now we're going to strike a line across the front edge of our sofa where that decking was originally sewn in, marking the center so that we can put our new decking on and sew it in place. We cut a center notch on our seam allowance in our decking and lined it up with the center, and now we're going to pull it to the outside edge and staple it in place on both sides so we can get it nice and tight. Once it's nice and tight, we can sew that seam allowance down to the decking material below to give ourselves that nice ridge line at the front of the sofa. Taking a curved sewing needle, we're going to sew this seam allowance down right on top of that line we struck earlier. This will secure that front edge of the sofa so that when we stretch it down, it's going to look nice and full. There's also a decking fabric underneath this that we're going through, so it's not just the batting. It can be a little difficult to get the needle up through all that material, but just take your time at this and you'll make it all the way across. I found that a pair of pliers could also help you pull the needle up and through once you get it poked out. We finished sewing our decking down all the way across the sofa, so now we're going to take one end of our twine, feed it out to the outside, and staple it in place. Then we'll pull all of the loose thread to the other side of the sofa and staple that side in place as well. Stapling our decking to the frame is next. We're going to use Sailrite spray adhesive and spray across the front of our sofa. Sailrite spray adhesive is great for gluing foam-to-foam applications together. It is also very economical, making it our top choice for projects like this. We'll also be spraying a strip of batting that goes across this front edge and then applying it to the front of our sofa. And we'll be applying it right on top of that seam allowance all the way down the sofa and then trimming off the excess at the end. Now we're going to cut slits in the back of our decking so that we can feed it back past the wooden obstacles in the back. So we're going to push this all back so that it's nice and tight, then take a staple gun and staple it in place. We're going to trace a line across right on top of our laser, and this line is a little bit higher than where our staple line previously was. Then we'll trim off our batting. This line is even with the top edge of the bottom of the frame on the sofa. We previously stapled this on already, but we didn't like how low it was and how it looked, so we restapled it higher up using our laser. Now we're going to trim off the excess material. Next up, we'll be installing piping and then finishing that bottom edge. We've made some of our own piping. You can find a link to a video on how to do that in the description below. And we're going to staple this piping all the way across, going both directions, making sure we get it nice and even. We cut a strip of fabric to go across this front edge that's extra long and also with extra fabric going down to the bottom. And we're going to use a cardboard upholstery tack strip and tack in the center of that all the way across, creating a nice crisp edge in the process. Now we're going to apply sew foam down this bottom edge. We've applied glue to the foam side of our sew foam and the frame, and we're going to stick it down going both directions. Sew foam is a great way to pad and soften hard edges like we are here. We'll start stapling in the center, going both directions until we have it all stapled down. Now we'll trim off our sew foam right at where that arm begins. Coming up, we'll be creating our new foam backrest. This is the backrest, and this is some of the original materials they used to create it, and we're going to remove all of these and start with the frame. We're also going to remove this foam across the top. Now we've taken some decking fabric and hugged it up to this top edge, and we're going to staple it in place. This is replacing that mesh fabric they used to have on there, and this will give us a nice base for our foam. We're going to tuck it all back in underneath there, and we're going to make sure that we staple it up to the top board so that we have enough room to push our new fabric through when we're done. We're going to cut the necessary slits to go around any obstacles in the back. Then we're going to measure that top edge so we can replace the foam that we removed earlier. This foam saw is great for both DIYers and upholstery shops. The two-blade system has one stationary blade that grabs the foam while the moving one saws. This creates less bounce than a single blade foam cutter. We applied glue both to the foam and the top of the sofa here, and we're going to line this up and glue it in place. We have foam that's larger than our backrest, and we're going to mark for our armrest so that we can cut a notch out of the side and allow it to fit into place. Now we're going to use polyester batting to fill out the rest of our backrest. And we'll be probably layering layer upon layer so that we can get them both to be nice and even so they don't have any empty spots on it. And then we'll glue it to the top. In order to achieve a smooth top edge, we're going to use our foam shaper and shape this front corner just so we have a nice flat edge. This foam shaper is also great for shaping bolster pads and automotive seating. We're going to take our spray glue and spray it on a strip of sew foam we cut, and then apply glue to the top of that backrest and apply our sew foam so that we can get a nice squared top edge. Then we glued a small piece of foam onto the outside of the backrest so that it reached the outside of our wood frame. Adding foam to our armrest is up next. We're going to measure our top edge of our armrest so we can determine what size foam to cut. We cut out that foam using the foam saw, and now we're going to spray glue all the way into the back edge on both the armrest and on our piece of foam. Once it's tacked up, we'll apply it. We cut a piece of sew foam, and now we're going to apply it on that inside arm using our spray glue. We also cut a piece for the front of our arm, and we'll use our spray glue to apply this sew foam there as well. We will also apply our sew foam to this top edge, stopping right at the top of the foam on our armrest. In this chapter, we'll be sewing our armrest. Now Eric's going to show us how to measure for our armrest, measuring the length, the height, and the thickness of our boxing. And then we'll write all those measurements down and go over what our final measurements are. We're going to be adding a 1/2 inch sew foam to the thickness of our armrest, so we want to cut our boxing to 5.5 inches. This is the exact width of the top of our armrest. We're going to cut our boxing strips to a 5.5 inch width, 137 inch long, and 123 inches. And then we'll cut our side panels to 37 by 23, and we'll need 2 of those. The front edge of our armrest is also angled, so our boxing will be angled. And so Eric is marking both corners of the front of the armrest so we can take it over to the table, strike a line with our clear acrylic ruler, and cut it off with a pair of scissors. Now we'll take our long boxing piece with the angle cut into it and baste it with outside surfaces to the shorter piece of boxing that is our front. We're also going to change our standard foot to a knurled foot. This knurled foot should prevent damage to the faux leather fabric. We're going to change our stitch length to 3 to 4 millimeters to sew this seam allowance. We're going to sew a 1/2 inch from that edge all the way across. Now we're going to apply basting tape down one side of our seam allowance, then peel off the transfer paper and baste that seam allowance down right on that stitch. Then we'll place the basting tape on the opposite side of that seam allowance and splay it apart and baste it down as well. Now we'll take some of our decking material and place it on top of our seam allowances, creating a reinforced French seam. We'll use the inside edge of our outside foot to go along that stitch line and sew our French seam. We'll do this on both sides. Remember how we cut the angle into our top boxing? That also means that we need to cut that 1 inch off of our side plate. So we're going to mark that here on the arm, then measure down to the bottom of the sofa and mark a line down there, and then strike a line from that top edge down that measurement. Now we're going to take that side plate and our top boxing over to the sofa and make sure that we get it sewn on there properly. So we need to make sure outside surfaces are facing each other and our corner matches up. Now we place basting tape along that top edge and the front edge of our armrest, and we're going to baste this to our boxing. Now we're going to cut a corner in our boxing going no more than our 1/2 inch seam allowance, and we're going to baste this corner down to that corner that we trimmed the angle into on our side plate of our armrest. And we'll baste it down in both directions starting at that corner. Now we'll take our application over to the sewing machine and sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance down the side using the magnetic sewing guide, and we'll show you what we do at the corner. We're also using a size number 20 needle and Tex 90 polyester thread. At the corner, we're going to sew up to where we slit it, bury our needle with it coming up slightly, and then lift our foot, rotate the material, and sew down the other edge. Now we'll do our same process to create our French seam, splaying out both of the seam allowances and adding our decking fabric on top. Now we'll sew our French seam in the same way, and I'll show you what we do when we get to the corner. It's also not a bad idea to turn down the worker bee if you want to be really precise on this stitch. The worker bee is fantastic for detailed applications like this. It gives you unparalleled power as well as stitch by stitch speed control. We're coming up to the corner and we're going to sew up so that our needle stops buried on that stitch with the needle coming up a little bit. Then we'll lift the foot, rotate the fabric, and sew down this other side. Sewing the inside corner is the exact same process. We'll stop a 1/2 inch from that stitch and we will pivot on that needle and sew down this other side. We basted the other side panel on, and now we're going to sew our 1/2 inch seam allowance down both the front and top side. Then we'll baste down both of the seam allowances and place our reinforcing fabric on top and sew a French seam just like we did on the other side. Stapling the armrest to the frame is next. You may notice there's no decking fabric or sew foam on this outside of the sofa. That's because we need to pull the inside first and staple it down before we install our decking and sew foam. Now we're taking our cover and we're going to slide it over the outside of our armrest and start getting it into position. And that'll require us to tuck things in and probably cut a few slits wherever we have obstacles with the frame. We're going to use a scriball pencil to mark the location where we want to stop our slit. You could also just hold your finger there and cut up to that location, but marking it can be helpful. Now we'll cut it with a pair of scissors. Now we'll start pushing the fabric back to that outside edge, and then we'll also cut a slit in the back corner to feed it through and past the frame. We'll also have to cut slits back here at the back of the headrest area so that we can push this through and get a nice look going down the outside edge of the armrest. Now that we've fed all the fabric through and we got it looking pretty good, we're going to be stapling it down, and we'll be checking the other side to make sure we got it pretty tight while we're doing it. I mean, I haven't pulled back yet, so I'm also going to get some tension that way, but obviously I want to get it looking as good as possible right here where I'm at, and then I'll continue to staple. Now we're going to install our decking material all the way around the perimeter, stapling it with some tension. Now we'll spray our spray glue on both the decking and side of the sofa, and then we'll apply our sew foam. We're using this edge at the top that's straight, one of the factory edges, to go all the way across, and then we'll trim it around the perimeter and show you what's next. I also recommend you wear gloves when doing this, because the spray glue is not fun to take off your hands. Now we've pulled that armrest back over the top, and we're going to stretch it towards the back. So we're pulling at an angle towards that back corner, and Eric is helping me here because it's just a little bit too difficult for one person. And I'm pushing my hand in there so that I can get my seam allowance to land exactly on top of the corner of my armrest. And then I'll staple it in place, making sure it looks good all the way down the arm, and we get our seam allowance in the proper location. And remember, you can always remove staples and restaple it in place if you need to make changes. And we'll continue to pull and stretch it so we get a nice good look, and we'll staple it on the bottom and the back. One of the last steps is to pull the inside of the arm back here to the back. And we need to make sure that we staple this to the outside of the frame, not the inside, because we have to still run the backrest through that same hole. We're going to go back to that bottom edge and make sure we get it all nice and smooth. So you can see there's some bumps and lumps, but we're going to get that all smoothed out. And then we'll move on to the front, stretching it down so we get a nice look. Installing our batting on the backrest is next. We've got a piece of batting that's larger than our backrest, and we're going to staple it here at the top, and then we'll feed it through the front and around the sides, and we'll have to cut slits for any areas that are going to hit our wooden frame. And now we'll staple the batting up here in the back. We have to staple it up because we still need to push the backrest panel through that gap. We'll be measuring and sewing our backrest cover next. Now we're going to take measurements to determine the size of our boxing and our front panel on the backrest. So I took a measurement at the top, measurement at the bottom, a measurement at the inside edge, and then we're going to take 2 measurements of the outside edge. So we'll measure the height, and then we're going to also measure the depth of this awkward corner over here. And last but not least, we'll measure for the thickness of our boxing, which we're going to have extra long since it wraps to the back and staples. We've written down all of those measurements onto our notepad, and now we're going to determine how we're going to cut our boxing. So we're going to cut one that's 8 inch plus 5 inch plus 20. That equals 33. And we're going to add a few extra inches to that, and then a 45.5 inch one plus 28 inches, so 73.5, and we're going to add a few inches to that. And those are the lengths of our boxing. And we'll also cut a front plate using our measurements. We're not going to show sewing the ends of our boxing together as it's the exact same as the armrest. Now we're just going to show basting it to that backrest panel, and we'll show you this inside corner, which is the most awkward of them all. We'll place our mark a 1/2 inch past where this corner is, and then we're going to make a triangle here, and this is what we're going to cut out to turn this corner. We've now cut that corner, as you can see, and we'll turn the entire application so that those two ends meet together, and we've turned our corner. Now we'll sew around that backrest panel, turning our corners just like we did on the armrest, and we'll show you that weird inside corner when we get to it. When we come up to this odd corner, we're actually just going to almost straighten the fabric and sew right over that triangle we cut out earlier. Then we'll apply the decking on the seam allowance and sew our French seam onto this backrest panel. It's the same process as it was for the armrest. Installing the backrest cover is coming up. Now we're going to begin working on the backrest. We're going to cut slits to go around our wooden frame, just like we did with the armrest, on all the sides, and pull it into place. We did find that it was best to start with this outside corner and align that seam up there at the top. Then we'll move back to the center of the sofa and cut our slit here to go around the back of the frame. We'll also pull that inside edge to the back of the sofa and staple it in place. Now we'll cut a slit down here at this bottom edge to feed it to the back of the sofa. It's pretty easy from this point on. Just make sure you don't cut too deep, and you can always cut short and then cut more if it doesn't fit. Once we start to get everything into the right position, we can start stapling it to the back. After stapling much of the sofa in place, we noticed that this center gap needed a little bit more plumping, so we'll use a regulator and shove some more batting in there to make it look even with the other side of the backrest. And finally, we'll add all the rest of the staples that are needed to hold this backrest panel in place. Creating the cushion cover is next. Sailrite offers many videos on sewing up cushions, including several on sewing up sofa cushions, so we won't be showing you much of this process. I'll also include a link to a cushion that closely resembles the sofa cushion in the description below. With our old cushion in place, we're going to use our patterning material and a Sharpie to pattern around our cushion. We'll be using a premium Cushionrite foam with a medium firmness for our cushion. This premium foam has a density of 2.8, making it a high density foam that will typically last up to 12 years with high traffic. Now we're going to be sewing a French seam on our cushion. The process is the exact same as it was for the side and back of the sofa. We'll only be sewing our French seam on the top of our cushion and not the bottom. Reinforcing the French seam provides a lot of strength and is a must in our opinion. The process for this French seam is the exact same as it was with the armrest and the backrest, so we're going to move on to the next step. We've placed silk film on our table and we'll place our cushion on top, and usually we would suck down the foam using our silk film, but because this cushion is made with Nook and Nook has such a soft backing, this is just going to slide right in there easily. So we're just going to wrap it and then slide it in there with the silk film. Silk film is a great tool when installing foam into a cushion because the foam is usually bigger than the cover. So sucking it down can be awesome. You just need a shop vac to do that. In this chapter, we'll be installing our vent grommets. Now we're going to mark our locations for where we want our vent grommets. We really just want them to be evenly spaced from the outside edge on both sides. So we'll mark our location and then take it over to the brand new handy press to install them. The reason we're installing vent grommets is because if we don't, the fabric is going to blow up like a balloon when you sit on it. These vent grommets will allow the air to escape. Now we're going to cut holes using the handy press and install our 1-inch vent grommets. We're going to be installing this vent grommet in the back of our cushion and at the bottom of our boxing so you won't see it. We're going to install a second one as well, and we want these to be spaced about 18 to 24 inches apart. Take the male portion of the grommet and install it on the lower portion of the die, then push the fabric over the top of it. Now we'll place the female portion on top, and we'll depress the lever to install our vent grommet in the back of our cushion. We'll repeat this with the second hole. Now it's time to install the foam in our cushion, and that silk film will help make it an easy task, and we'll just slide it on in there and then push out all the corners and make sure it all looks nice, and we get the seam allowance on the top edge of our foam. Before we zip up the cushion, we're going to take the silk film and tear some of it away so it's not in the way of our slider, and then we'll zip it shut. Our cushion is now complete and we'll install it on the sofa. Next up, we'll be installing the sofa back. We cut a panel for the back of our sofa that's extra tall and extra wide, and we're going to strike a line 2 or 3 inches from the top edge so that we have a guideline for our staples. We'll also mark the center of this panel so we know where to start. Now we're over at the sofa, and I'm going to put some tacking staples on that are below our line across the sofa so that I can get it in position for our cardboard tack strip. And now that we have everything in position, we'll start in the center and put our tack strip in place and tack it on all the way across the top of the sofa. We'll stop stapling about 1 inch or 2 from the corner so that we can get our tack strip in and get it all rolled over and looking nice. Now we'll install our 1/4 inch batting across the back of our sofa right on top of that tack strip. We turn the sofa upside down, and now we'll pull the batting tight and staple it on the bottom edge. Then we'll do the same thing on the sides. Now we're going to use our wire rope cutters to cut our upholstery tack strip to size. We're going to place basting tape down the back of the tack strip, and then we're going to install some of our cardboard upholstery tack strip to the back of this so that it prevents damage to our material when we're pounding it in with a hammer. We folded the fabric over along the outside edge of the sofa to determine where the upholstery tack strip will go, and we're going to use a pencil, a grease pencil in this case, to mark all the way up this outside edge of our back panel. Then we'll take a clear acrylic ruler and strike a line going between all of those dashed lines. This will be the location where our tack strip goes, and the reason we're doing this is because our couch has a slight angle. Now we're going to take our tack strip and push it into our panel with the left end, or the edge to our left on the screen, up against the edge of that line. Now we're going to trim at an angle on our top corner, and then also remove some of this to reduce the bulk when we roll it over. Now we're going to take it and we're going to roll that raw edge to the inside all the way around like so, and then we're going to pull it nice and tight and tack it in with our hammer. You will have to hit it pretty hard to get it into position, but you shouldn't worry since we've installed that cardboard tack strip to help protect it. Now we're stapling that back panel down to the frame. We want to keep these staples away from the edge of the frame so that we can install our cambric dust cover later on. Stapling the dust cover to the bottom is our final chapter. Now we're going to install our cambric dust cover on the bottom. We're going to start on one of the sides and put a staple in the middle, and then we'll stretch it to the front and the back to make sure we have enough material and staple it on the other side. We're also going to mark the location where all 4 of the wheels get reinstalled to the sofa. Now we'll just work our way all the way around the perimeter, folding the corners in and stapling it down. Our sofa is now complete and it looks great. For a list of the tools and materials we used to complete this project, take a look at the description below. Also, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell to be notified when new videos become available. From all of us here at Sailrite, I'm Seth Grant. Thanks for watching.